It's time for the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast.
On this edition of the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast, a Thursday night brawl, you Vike that, in so many more interesting headlines from this week in the NFL. Plus, Colin Kaepernick's Saturday workout, fantasy football files, and so much more. Make sure you stay tuned for another exciting episode.
Indeed, I'm glad you connected. This is Dave Johnson, voice of the Washington Wizards. You have connected to the right place because you are listening to my man, Josh Kirby, on Sports Podcast.
All right, another edition of the Josh Kirby on Sports Podcast here with you today. Beautiful evening outside. I want to say, it's starting to get cold. Holidays are coming up, but we have a lot to get started for you here on the podcast. A lot of great sports talk. I'm really excited for this episode. But before we begin, we're part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network. Make sure you check them out on Instagram, Twitter, and all streaming platforms. We are sponsored by Route 11 Chips and PM Plus Reserves. As always, want to thank Dave Johnson, MPT Now Productions, and JR Beats Official. As always, I'm joined with contributor Dan Dembski live from Blacksburg, Virginia. Dan, Virginia Tech had a pretty commanding win over Wake Forest. Wake Forest. I forget who it was. Was it Wake Forest?
Tech.
Georgia Tech. The colors are similar. That's why I thought it was Wake Forest. So
I understand.
Anyways, very commanding win in shutout fashion. Where's that putting Virginia Tech in the standings for the Coastal and a bowl bid?
Well, they are currently tied for second. Technically second and first, because I think UVA, Virginia Tech, and Pitt all have the same conference record and same overall record. So, our last two games of the season, of course, are against Pitt and UVA, naturally. So, it's not out of the question. In fact, it's looking pretty strong if that last game of the season against UVA comes down to deciding the Coastal Division of the ACC. So, they're right where they need to be right now, Josh, and they're finally in the top 25. They cracked the top 25. If you would have asked me a month ago, would I think that they would end up in the top 25, I would have laughed. The sky was falling not that long ago. So the fact that they've been able to turn it around ever since the Duke game and put themselves in the position that they put themselves in is incredible. And I'm going to be staying this weekend, at least for the game on Saturday, and my dad's coming down. We're going to go, and it's a huge game, so it has a lot of implications on the Coastal, and it's going to be exciting.
Yes, sir. I love to hear it. And still grinding away at ESPN Blacksburg covering volleyball for Virginia Tech. So as always, make sure you check Dan out on Twitter at Dan the VT Man 97. Dan, a lot to unpack from this past week of NFL football. Before we get into all the games and stuff, I want to talk about the incident in this Thursday night football matchup. Myles Garrett, unbelievable. I went to bed at halftime of that game, and I woke up, and every single news and media outlet had a story about Myles Garrett taking off Mason Rudolph's helmet. They got into a fight, and Myles Garrett proceeds to hit Mason Rudolph with his own helmet, which is uncalled for. And as we're unpacking this story over the next couple of days, you I've realized, yes, Mason Rudolph did start the fight by trying to take Miles Garrett's helmet off, but there were things on both sides that led to the both teams fighting, and it was really uncalled for what Miles Garrett did. Even if Mason Rudolph started it, I've said this multiple times off air, it's still, there's no place for it in the NFL, and his suspension for the rest of the season is a great call, and there might be more tacked on for next year. But yeah, what's really irritating me about this is Mason Rudolph just got off the concussion protocol. So what if something were to happen if Miles Garrett hurt Mason Rudolph and he couldn't have played football again? But a very, very crazy night on Thursday night between the Steelers and Browns. We'll unpack that game later on in the episode, but as of today, Mason Rudolph is going to be fined for his actions $35,096, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. Dan, I'm sure you watched some of that game, if not all of it. Give me your thoughts about what you saw on that Thursday night matchup.
I've never seen anything like that on a football field in my lifetime. Not in an NFL game, certainly. And I think the NFL did the right thing as far as punishing Myles Garrett. He should be suspended for the rest of the year and maybe part of next year, if just depending on how the whole situation goes, and if he can prove that he can, kind of, seem like he's changed his ways per se. So that's really the key going forward for him. Yeah, and you made a great point. I was actually going to bring that up. What if, if he catches him with the harder part of the helmet? And I had heard this today on the Tony Kornheiser show. They had CBS NFL insider Jason LaCanfora on, and he was talking about, if Myles Garrett had hit him with the harder part of the helmet, I mean, you could be talking about criminal charges at that point, especially if there was, if he busted his head or something like that. You're talking about going from, the NFL punishing Myles Garrett to all of a sudden they're going to be in the courtroom. So
there were talks about Mason Rudolph filing charges, but he declined to. But
right.
that was a crime, Dan. I mean, I've said this multiple times off air before. What if I came to your house in Blacksburg, hit you upside the head with a table? That's assault with a weapon, and I'd be in jail.
Yeah, no, I totally.
Normal humans can't get away with that, and yeah, I was very, I wasn't really surprised, but I was hoping that in the back of my mind that Myles Garrett would have been arrested on the field and walked off by police officers. But we all know that's not going to happen. But still, that was on the borderline of probably Myles Garrett getting prosecuted in a court of law if Mason Rudolph decided to take that route.
Yeah, and I think you had a case. I mean, obviously you have video evidence that's pretty clear as day what happened. I think anyone with eyes could see that. But I kind of disagree over the Mason Rudolph punishment. I think he should have gotten some sort of low grade suspension, maybe a couple games in his role, not just because he initiated the fight, but if you take a look at the things that happened, he tried to rip Myles Garrett's helmet off and kick him in his, let's say, his private parts. Let's call it that. Let's be respectful. I kind of think in a situation like this, I think everyone involved needs some sort of suspension. I just don't know if you can justify suspending a couple players and finding the one who was probably the main one, who was obviously the main one affected by Myles Garrett swinging the helmet, of course. But Marquise Pouncey was suspended, and then a Cleveland defensive lineman, Larry, I'm not even sure how to say his name. Anyway, Anyway,
Yeah, I was thinking how to say his name too. I can't, but we'll call him
No.
Larry.
Larry, perfect. He got a
yeah,
1-game suspension.
yeah, because of that cheap shot afterwards in the end zone. He just shoved him from behind, like cross-checking in hockey.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, like I said, I think the punishment for Myles Garrett was perfect. I think it needed to be a quick response from the league. Normally they take 2 to 3 days after the incident to make something happen. This time they jumped on it immediately, which they should have done, and that I think was justified. I just can't understand not just fining Mason Rudolph. I've heard both sides of it. Um, you know, even a 1-game suspension to me would have been enough, and not fining him. Because I don't really think a fine does much good when there's situations like this. I don't think the player really learns from that situation. So it really could have gone either way. He could have been fined. He could have been suspended. But the interesting thing now is what's going to happen the next time these two teams play, even without Myles Garrett on the field for the Browns. It's going to be interesting. This is kind of a new rivalry. Remember, for quite a while in that division, it was Pittsburgh and Cincinnati who had sort of the rough games. The memorable one was that 2015. I think it was a playoff game where Antonio Brown got a concussion, and that was a really bloody game. So it can be interesting to see if these two teams are fired up for this next game. Obviously, they're fired up anyway, but this just adds more fuel to the fire, and maybe this is a birth of a new rivalry in this division, which has had its fair share of rivalries throughout the years.
Yeah. So, other than that, while we're on this game, just really quick, the game just looked very sloppy. The Steelers looked really sloppy, and the Browns got a much needed win. But all around, it was a very, very sloppy game, in my opinion. Just recapping this game really quick before we move into our next topic and the Sunday games.
Yeah, Rudolph really did not play well, and I think that I don't think it justifies him kind of starting that initial response, I guess. But he had 4 interceptions, and of course the Steelers lose 21-7. They were frustrated in that loss. You could see it, and it kind of spilled over and got way out of hand quickly, thanks to Myles Garrett and thanks to Myles Garrett mostly, I'd say. But
Yeah, so moving on before we get into the Sunday slate, I also want to talk about one other piece of news. Colin Kaepernick had his workout on Saturday, and I saw some of the highlights. It looked like he was making some pretty good throws, but that, in my opinion, if some team decides to sign Colin Kaepernick, which I am not really sure if that will happen, uh, will he be the same as he was 2-3 years ago when he was last in the league? That's my whole thing on it. I really don't want to make this political because this is a sports podcast. But
right.
Did you happen to watch the Kaepernick workout?
I saw bits and pieces of it. It's impossible to tell. I'll be honest, of whether a guy's going to be able to play in pads, in full contact, in an NFL environment. We know he's kept in good shape. We've seen that. He's had multiple workout videos, multiple sort of training videos that he's done to show that he's in shape. That's not the concern. I think the concern is if he can take a hit by an NFL defensive end at this point. He's been away from the game for so long, and you definitely lose that part of it once you're away for so long. So, I'm hesitant to say whether he could play or not right now. I really don't know. I think the way he handled the situation, the way he suddenly switched the venue and sort of made it kind of more about him, or more about the media side of things, getting more PR per se, really hurts him. It really hurts him at the end of the day. So I'm not sure if the team's going to sign him anyway. I think at least this season, we won't see him signed. And of course, that's going to create some issues. But I'm not sure if he can be productive. It's way too hard to tell from a guy working out in shorts and t-shirt, just throwing the ball around to some of his friends. If he can play at an NFL level, it's impossible to say at this point in time until he tries out, until he has a workout for an NFL team, and then we get a better chance of what he's of what he can do with pads on. Not getting hit obviously in a workout, but at least with shoulder pads, and see how he performs. So there are a couple teams that are interested. I've heard today there's been some rumblings. Supposedly, nothing's been official yet, but I don't see how he gets signed at this point in time. I think if he had handled it the way that it was originally intended, where he goes to the Falcons training facility and works out there in front of 28 NFL scouts instead of 7, which are 7 teams who showed up,
including the Redskins.
Right, the Lions, Chiefs, Jets, Eagles, 49ers, Titans, and Skins were all there. So, you would have had most of the NFL. Maybe it wasn't 28. It was 25 NFL teams that were going to be there at the Falcons facility. That would have worked better for him anyway. So I don't know, Josh. It's impossible. It's impossible. I mean, I could go out there in shorts and t-shirt and throw the ball around and make a case for myself to be an NFL quarterback. Now, obviously, he's got experience. He played in a Super Bowl, so there's no doubt that he in the past he could definitely do it. I just think you've been away from the game for 3 years. It's really hard to say definitively whether he is going to be back and going to be at the same level. I don't think he can be at the same level, but that's just how I feel.
Yeah, so and after the workout, he had a press conference saying we're open to interview with any of the 32 teams. His agent will be open about that. And there was a T-shirt he was wearing that had political views. So I don't want to go into that much, but still, there's a part of me that thinks this is just for him to gain publicity in the media. I could be shooting that out of left field, excuse me, but that's a thought looming in the back of my mind as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. I think it's impossible to tell. We just don't know. But certainly the way he handled the situation, like I said, changing the venue, making it open to the media, those. That sort of seems to me like a publicity stunt sort of thing. But again, I think he can play in the NFL. I just don't know at what level he can play, and that's going to be that's the concern I think for a lot of people because he's been away for so long.
Yeah. So who knows? But Colin Kaepernick did have a workout. If it goes anywhere, time will tell. So let's move into this Sunday slate of games. Not really that many great matchups. Just a few I want to touch on. Dan, we'll start with Baltimore's rout over Houston. I was very surprised when I saw Baltimore shutting out Houston through 3 quarters of the football game with a 6-3 record on Houston's end. I thought this game would be more competitive on both sides of the football, but Baltimore just played better on all sides of the ball. And Lamar Jackson, 4 touchdowns, 222 yards, including 86 rushing yards. What a day for the Baltimore Ravens in all. And I'm going to let you unpack this game a little bit more for us.
Yeah, it was a slow start, no score in the first quarter. It was basically a punt fest to start the game. The Ravens missed a field goal. They had some missed opportunities. But really, the Texans just couldn't move the ball all game long. They really struggled. The Ravens defense is really starting to just play at an unbelievable level. That's the third week in a row now they've down a really solid quarterback, of course, starting with Russell Wilson a couple weeks back, and then Tom Brady, and now Sean Watson. I forgot his name. That's terrible. So they held Deshaun Watson to no touchdowns and an interception. This defense is really stepped up. They've really played well, and the offense is clicking better than any other offense, I think, right now. And people who think Lamar Jackson isn't an MVP contender are crazy. I mean, his numbers speak for themselves, and he can throw the ball a lot better than people give him credit for. So that's certainly something to look forward to. But yeah, this game was surprising to me as well, Josh, especially coming out in the second quarter, going up 14-0, and then coming out of the break and then keeping pace with that in the third and fourth, getting to 41. This is not a team historically offensively that's been able to put up these kinds of numbers. They're not an organization that's been able to put up 35 to 40 points per game. That's just not what they do. They've been for the longest time a defensive team, and right now they've got both those things working, and I think they're just starting to prove more and more each week that they're not only a Super Bowl contender, but that Lamar Jackson is an MVP contender. And I thought people put him at the top of the list right now, and it's if he keeps winning games and keeps performing the way he has, which has been phenomenal, then he's definitely going to be there. I think you can make a case for Russell Wilson as well. He's had an unbelievable season. So those two guys, I think, are really battling it out right now. So, I was extremely surprised and very impressed with how they played. And I've never in my lifetime seen a Ravens team dominate, games like this. So this is new for me. And I just hope they keep doing it. I hope they can keep it up. They play the Rams on Monday Night Football here in Los Angeles coming up on Monday night. So I'm looking forward to watching that game. I'll be at home. So maybe, get together with some friends and watch that one, hopefully, and just try to enjoy it because they really haven't had many primetime games, and maybe this will be people are starting to see that this team is for real.
Yeah, you have your opinion, that's fine, but I still think it's too early to make a case on who will be going to the Super Bowl. That's just my opinion.
I just said contender. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to be in the Super Bowl. Contender just means they have a pretty good shot. I mean, right now, I mean, they're the second best team in the AFC behind the Patriots. The Patriots are not playing like the Patriots. And I'm sure we'll touch on their game that was this past Sunday. So I think the Ravens are the best team in the AFC, and they're getting hot at the right time right now.
Yeah, but all in all, that was a great win, and I was very surprised. So, moving on, Dallas kept it really close. Detroit, with their backup quarterback Jeff Driscoll, 2 touchdowns in that game. They kept it close for most of the game, but Dallas came away with the win, 35-27. Atlanta, what's going on with Atlanta?
They're getting hot.
Oh my
They're
God.
getting hot now.
29-3. The Panthers only put up 3 points. And the Panthers, they just looked awful in that game. And the Falcons, they might be turning it around at just the right time.
Well, Dan Quinn's going to keep his job. And I think a couple weeks ago that was a concern. I think have they won 3 straight games now? They were 0-7.
They beat New Orleans, and then they beat Carolina.
That's right. Okay. So, I mean, they've rattled off two great wins in a row, especially against New Orleans. I don't think many people expected that. But how about the Atlanta defense holding, the Panthers to just 3 points, a team that has one of the best running backs in the NFL, and Christian McCaffrey. They bottled him up just had 70 yards on the ground, and McCaffrey was also their leading receiver. He's pretty much their whole offense, and they, I think the game plan for Kyle Allen is like just get McCaffrey the football, but 4 interceptions pretty much tells the story and tells you everything you need to know about this game. The Atlanta defense was relentless and has really stepped up here in the last couple of weeks, especially against New Orleans and now against Carolina. I think Dan Quinn, like I said at the beginning of my talking, which I do a lot of, keeps his job, and I think that's pretty solidified now. He's got them playing pretty solid football. I mean, they've got some work to do. They've got a lot of issues still, but look, they're 3-7, and that's not great. But they've won 2 straight games and pretty much dominated in both of them. So, and against formidable opponents. And I think Matt Ryan. I don't know how much he has left in the tank. I think he could play 2 or 3 more years maybe. But he's played really well this year for them. He's still been a top tier passer. They've just had a bad season, and he hasn't had a lot of help on his side of the ball, and the defense, of course, but prior to that game against the Saints, had not been helping him out either. But now they look like a different team, Josh. Looks like they're playing inspired football, and I think that's worth more than people give it credit for.
Yeah, so from one upset in the Falcons and the Panthers, moving on to another crazy upset. Dan, from you like that to do you like that? The Minnesota Vikings down 20-0 at home against the struggling Denver Broncos. It looks like Vic Fangio put together the greatest game plan, but then meet Kirk Cousins. 319 yards and 3 touchdowns, putting up 7 points in the third quarter and 20 points in the third quarter and 20 points in the fourth quarter to beat the Broncos 27-23. Granted, the Broncos had almost a great drive, but they could not cap it off with an incompletion in the end zone. And the Vikings, this was the game of the week, hands down. The Vikings down 20-0, coming back and winning. We've seen this in Kirk Cousins before. What does this mean for the Minnesota Vikings moving forward with this statement win?
It's a huge win, not only in the implication of just getting a win, but look at where they sit right now. They're 8-3. They're right where they want to be in the standings. Of course, it's going to be hard, I think, to catch, Green Bay at this point. But give me a sec. This thing's taking forever to load. They're a wild card team right now. They're the 6th seed, and if the playoffs started today, they would travel to New Orleans to play the Saints. So they're a fantastic football team. And this win proves it, but it also proves on the other side of the ball that the Broncos choked. I mean, let's face it, you cannot blow a 20-0 lead. It just can't happen, especially when everything was going your way. And I think the issue was in that game, and the issue is in general when you blow a lead like that, you get too cute, you get too conservative, you just want to run clock instead of trying to put up more points. And that seemed to be the Broncos' issue. They just couldn't move the ball. Give credit also to the Vikings defense, Josh. They really stepped it up in the second half. But I think there's always give and take in a game like this. And Kirk Cousins, he was fantastic. But the Broncos just with the ultimate choke job. That's the way I see it. So it's a huge win for the Vikings. They stay in that wild card spot right now. And they're actually only 1 game behind. They're actually 1 game behind Green Bay right now. So I believe they play 1 more time. I think they've already played once this season. So that's going to be a fun one to watch. And to me right now, the NFC is very intriguing. There's a lot of teams that are sitting right now at 8-2 and 8-3. So Minnesota's right where they need to be, and that's a key thing for them moving forward. And we'll see how it plays out throughout the season.
All right. So other matchups in the league, Buffalo beats Miami 37-20. New Orleans over Tampa Bay 34-17. San Francisco almost let one slip away against Arizona. Arizona was leading for the most part of that game from what I have seen, but they come away
Mm-hmm.
with the win there. Oakland over Cincinnati, who drops to 0-10 on the season. The Rams and the Bears 17-7. Chicago just did not have the pop they needed, and it looked
That
like
was a snooze fest.
Trubisky went out with another injury. But another game I want to unpack a little bit, Dan, is the New England Philadelphia game. Very close game, but it just looks like New England hasn't been playing on the highest gear that they should. Although this isn't a problem, but the Eagles almost beat the Patriots, but the Eagles just didn't have what it took to produce a game-winning drive.
Well, I think for the Patriots, they have a Super Bowl caliber defense, and this is probably the best defense that Tom Brady has ever had in his career. To be able to go out there and not have to throw through 4 touchdowns, and in recent years Brady hasn't been that way, but you've really started this year to see the aging, and you've really started to see that he really is playing like a 40-plus-year-old quarterback now. And it makes you wonder really how much time he's got left in the National Football League, because he's not nearly the player he was even a year ago. So, the Eagles had so many chances, Josh, especially on offense. Carson Wentz, um, and that offense, they have talent. They have guys who can make plays, but for whatever reason, they just couldn't get it clicking. And drive after drive after drive. I watched that game, most of that second half, and I think the Eagles had like 4 or 5 straight punts in a row. So, even on third and short, they couldn't convert. That's a concern. And the Eagles aren't a playoff team. I think that's represented, but they're paying Carson Wentz a pretty penny. And he had 5 or 6 passes that were dropped interceptions. So this game could have been more of a blowout. And again, I think a lot of the credit goes to New England's defense for just frustrating Carson Wentz, forcing him to make a lot of bad throws. And like I said, I think Brady's running out of time. He's just not very um, his arm strength doesn't seem to be there, and that's concerning if you're a Pats fan. It has to end sometime. He's been in the league for 19 seasons. You have to start to move on from that, and maybe that day's coming sooner than later, because he really is not the same quarterback that he's been in previous years.
Yeah, so great game to watch. Another great game on the 4 o'clock slate of games. The last game on Monday night was the Kansas City Chiefs and Los Angeles Chargers played in Mexico. Not sure if you got a chance to watch that game, Dan, but how do you like the fact that the league is playing a game a year in Mexico now?
I don't have a problem with it. I think the more the NFL can branch out, and we've seen them do it in London. Um, there's been talks they've been trying to expand to other places in Europe, possibly. I think it's a good thing. You get fans internationally, and it helps to grow the brand. That's the ultimate goal here, is to grow the NFL. So I like it. It's a lot of people can debate whether or not they enjoy it or not. I think it's a good thing for the league. It's a good thing for these players, because they get seen by sort of a different audience down in Mexico. So that game though was very close, and the Chargers, I mean, they just gave the ball away practically.
Yeah, there were too many turnovers in that game.
Yeah, Philip Rivers had 4 interceptions, and I would put him sort of on the same sort of pedestal that I put Tom Brady on just recently, and that's time's running short, and he really is not the same quarterback he was a season ago. It's almost like they're the same script, and Philip Rivers pretty much single-handedly costed the Chargers that game. They only lost by a touchdown, but he had 4 interceptions. Patrick Mahomes didn't play that well either. He had a touchdown, but he also had a pick in less than 200 yards. It's a wonder what that injury has done to him. Maybe, we've seen now that he's human, obviously, and he's not the freak of nature he was at the beginning of this season, and then throughout last year, he was unbelievable. I think the Chargers they just got a lot of questions right now. It starts with Phillip Rivers. Where do you draw the line? I think they need to draft a quarterback, and I think we see it this season. Obviously, the quarterback class at the top is not too deep, and now with Tua's injury, that's going to be an even bigger question mark for a lot of teams. But you got to start moving forward. It's the same thing with the Patriots. It's the same thing with the Chargers. I think it's a little easier to replace Phillip Rivers than it is with Tom Brady, because Brady has the rings. Phillip Rivers has won, very few playoff games in his career. So he just played poorly. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, so that about wraps up our week 11 talk, but I have sort of a mini segment. I want to get your opinion on this before we move on to the next segment, Dan. Dan, who is the bigger dumpster fire in the National Football League? The 0-10 Cincinnati Bengals or the 1-9 Washington Redskins?
I'm not going to go with the record here. I'm going to go with the team that is the bigger dumpster fire, and it's the Washington Redskins. They have an insane amount of issues on both sides of the ball. Just watching that game on Sunday, it's saddening, really, to watch them play, because considering where they were last year before the Alex Smith injury, they were right there in the playoff hunt. And now how far they've fallen, and the drama seems to just get more and more. I think it's partly because I pay attention to sort of that DC sports media side of things, but Dwayne Haskins yelling at his offensive lineman, that was caught on I think I was caught there by NFL Films. His performance, two garbage time touchdowns for him. By then it was a blowout, and this game shouldn't have been a blowout, Josh. It's inexcusable. So they're the bigger dumpster fire, and I think it starts at the top, and it starts with, people can blame Dan Snyder, and I think he, of course, is to be blamed, but it starts with Bruce Allen's comments halfway through the season or a little bit before that, where he said the Redskins have a, quote, damn good culture. And that first of all, that was a joke of a statement, and we've seen that they don't have a good culture there, and it's like I said, it's saddening as someone who's followed the Redskins for most of my life, and have seen sort of the crumble this year and the collapse of this football team. They nothing's working for them. They have a lot of drama in that general manager side of things. Bill Callahan is not a good football coach. He's supposed to be this genius. I'm not seeing it, Josh, and I think he was the wrong move. They should have brought in someone younger with a better vision. But this is Bruce Allen, and this is the Redskins we're talking about. They're the bigger dumpster fire, even though the Bengals are 0-10. The Bengals are playing Ryan Finley right now, so they're not going to win any games. Probably the rest of the season, but I think they still have less concerns than the Redskins do moving forward, and I think it starts with that offense and their inept ability to move the football.
You do realize that Jay Gruden got fired halfway through the season, and Bill Callahan has the interim tag on him, correct?
Oh yeah, I know, but he's the head coach right now. So that's kind of why I said what I said. So
yeah. I mean, it's sort of tough to bring in a brand new head coach halfway through the season. So they'll be on the hunt next year, I guarantee it. But some points from this, Bruce Allen's comments about a darn good culture. I'm going to paraphrase that, but Trent Williams has made it clear he will never play for the Redskins again. If you call
Yeah.
that a darn good culture, why? I don't get
It's
it.
a circus. It's
Yeah.
a circus, and it's a dumpster fire and a circus all at one. And if that story alone pretty much sums up the culture and just the team in general.
And the fans towards the end of the game, with what fans were left, were chanting to Dan Snyder, "Sell the team."
Yep. That's the sign of a dumpster fire, Josh. That's by the book.
And Dan, would you like to have some fun this weekend? Because club level seats at the Redskins game against the Lions are only $16.
Hey man, that doesn't sound too bad. You want to make the drive?
I'm not sure. Would you spend $16 to have a great time knowing the Redskins will lose, but enjoy the football experience, or does that
I
go
don't
to
know.
show how terrible the Redskins are and how much money Dan Snyder is losing from these plummeting ticket sales?
It's sad, and it's very sad, and it shows how bad that situation really is. And anytime ticket prices drop, it's not a good sign. Especially when they drop like that, $16. I can't imagine.
Yeah, and that's in the 200 level.
Yep, that's pretty close. So
upper level is $5.
Man, that's like going to a game in the 1970s. Jeez.
Yeah, I can't believe it, but it's very, very, very sad.
They got to get butts in the seats, and I guess that's the only way to do it. Because the Redskins fans haven't been showing out, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them. Nobody wants to watch a team on the field who's played that way, and of course, with the owner being as what's the word, blind as he's been. That's extremely frustrating, not just for Redskins fans, but for football fans alike.
Redskins fans, if you're still hopeful on the Redskins getting good in the next couple of years, it's not going to happen. They will be a rebuilding team for a long, long, long time. I am not expecting another playoff run for maybe 10 to 15 years. After that,
wow,
I'll maybe get
that's
hopeful.
a hot take.
Yeah,
that's a flipping hot take, man. Wow.
Okay, yeah, maybe we'll get this viral, but 10 to 15 years. I am not expecting a winning season or a playoff run. If they can do it earlier, great for them. I'll be cheering you on. But if not, I fully expected it. I'm a Redskins fan till I die. I'm there for a win, lose, or tie. It's hard, but I just can't hop the bandwagon, you know?
Okay, I have that down. 10 to 15 years, playoff run. Josh Kirby, 11/19/2019. Perfect.
All right.
Got it.
Jot it down,
So we
Dan.
have it down.
So
I got it.
That's our Week 11 segment. Coming up next, Fantasy Football Files with Jason Kamlowski. You're listening to the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Fantasy Files. I'm your host, Jason Kamlowski, part of the Josh Kirby podcast. I'm going to do something a little bit different this week and toy around with some DFS talk instead of doing like a season-long thing. Maybe look at some tournaments on DraftKings, talk about some good plays for your GPPs and tournaments. Going to get started off here. Just talk a little bit briefly about last week. Lamar Jackson, obviously another like monster week. He's kind of bankable, whether you're talking yearly or DFS, but he's kind of bankable across any format right now. Same thing with Christian McCaffrey. If you own, and it's quite possible in a year long that you own both of those guys. If you do, you got to feel really good about where you're at with them. I'm sure there's some teams out there in redraft too that, have like a McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Lamar Jackson look. And if you're in that boat, you've got to be feeling pretty good about, where you're at. which is, it's just one of those things, when we kind of look back on where we were in August versus now, we've talked about this a little bit before, but when we go back and look at kind of where we were in August, sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes injuries hit. And then sometimes, players just, they don't really pan out the way we think they do, which is why I think sometimes it's okay to just take a stance on a guy, and just if you like them, just take the stance. I mean, that's kind of where I was with Lamar Jackson, just take the stance and just be prepared to roll kind of with the punches. But, and when we're getting down to the point we are in season long, for a lot of you listening, I mean, you might be out of your season long stuff. So that's why I'm going to talk a little bit about the DFS spin. For those of you that don't play DraftKings, it's a 1 week kind of thing. There's pricing, where you fit in players under a salary cap. You start a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex, and then a defense. And obviously you pay for cash prizes. DraftKings is a PPR site. And you also get bonuses for 100 yards rushing and receiving and 300 yards and 400 yards passing. So, I think most people out there that probably play fantasy sports have heard of DFS before. But we'll go ahead and go through, some of the top options here. And, we'll start at quarterback like we always do. Russell Wilson, priced up a little bit, 6,800, but a great matchup, against Philadelphia, which is, they're coming off where the Philadelphia defense played pretty well against Tom Brady last week, held him in check. But Russ, coming into Philadelphia, this is one of those games. It's an early game. It's an early kickoff, I believe. Yeah, it's an early kickoff game. So, the Seahawks with an implied team total of almost 23.5. They're actually an underdog right now to the Eagles, and I think that's probably accounting for the cross-country trip and the early kickoff. But Russ is a strong play this week. Just from a pure points per dollar standpoint, looking, in an early look at the quarterback situation, I don't know that this is a week that I will be paying up for Russell Wilson. I think there's some better spots that we can talk about. But Russ is always one of the top plays on the slate, especially in a game where, it looks like we're looking at, a total of somewhere in the neighborhood of 48 or 49. And obviously it's early in the week. We're recording this on Tuesday night. So it's early in the week. But, the Seahawks, just the thing with Russ, and I think this is the thing we always look at with DFS and just kind of putting the DFS slant on Russ, is what's his volume going to be like? Is he going to get, 30, 35, pass attempts, or is this going to be more of a Chris Carson type game where Russ is only, throwing the ball 25, 26, 27 times? I actually tend to lean towards, we might get high volume Russ this week. And obviously if we do, the sky's the limit for him. We could be looking at, I don't know that this is like a ceiling game for Russell Wilson per se. But I do think there's a good chance that, we could see, that kind of 28, 29 point upside, for Russell Wilson. And he always has the opportunity to go off for a 40 point plus game, on DraftKings. I just don't think this is necessarily the spot. I think this is probably a sneakier spot than maybe some people think. I mean, obviously Vegas knows something, making the Eagles the favorite coming in. I think Russ will be a fantastic tournament option this week, but I'm not normally one to pay up for a quarterback in cash. So I will probably not have many shares of him there, but Russ is always good in tournaments. Moving down with the price list a little bit, we get Matt Ryan in an absolute smash spot against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, one of the biggest pass funnel defenses in the NFL. In Atlanta at home. And I think anytime you get Atlanta at home, and it looks like they're really starting to play a little bit better. They've shown some signs of life. And the Falcons team total is actually one of the highest on the board at 27.5. They're actually tied with the Browns right now for the highest team total. So this is definitely a spot where maybe you could look to Matt Ryan as a pivot off of Russell Wilson. Matt Ryan is almost a guarantee every week for the 300 yard bonus on DraftKings. And if we're just, again, and this is a purely because he's at 6,700. He's the second highest priced quarterback on the slate. But if we can get into a situation where, we get kind of shootout Matt Ryan, In a game like he had against Arizona, maybe a game like he had against Houston. We kind of like our opportunity here. The question I have is, are we going to get shootout Matt Ryan or not? I think we will. Tampa Bay, likes to throw the ball a lot. I think the biggest question I have right now is Tampa Bay. Can they keep up with Atlanta? The Atlanta offense has looked fantastic the last 2 weeks, or Atlanta defense has looked fantastic the last 2 weeks. If this is a game where it turns into, Jameis goes bad Jameis on us and throws, 5 interceptions in the first half, maybe Matt Ryan doesn't get that volume. So a lot of this is going to depend on, whether or not the Falcons, have to keep throwing the ball in the second half. Again, if we get one of those Matt Ryan 35 attempt games, then yes, he's absolutely worth paying up for. If we don't, we may want to look elsewhere. And I think, again, in tournaments, definitely viable in tournaments. You can pair him with Julio, you can pair him with Calvin Ridley. If Austin Hooper's back, you can definitely pair him with Austin Hooper. But Matt Ryan, always viable in tournaments. Now, looking at some other quarterbacks as we move down the pricing list, I think Baker Mayfield stands out this week, though, as one of the better values on the board at 5,900 going up against the Dolphins. The Dolphins are just an absolute, just mess. Josh Allen had probably his best game of the season last week, going up against the same Dolphins defense. John Brown, this is kind of a get-well spot for Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry to go with Baker Mayfield. Much like the first two quarterbacks we talked about, I think the biggest question we have here is, can the Dolphins keep up? Will Baker have to throw, 30, 35 times? I don't think necessarily at 5,900 we need peak Baker. But I think it's worth noting this year that we have not had a Baker Mayfield game where he scored more than 23 DraftKings points. And 5,900 is as high of a price as he's had since week 4. So, Baker's is probably still priced up a little bit much. Even for my taste. So, I don't know that Baker is necessarily something I'm definitely going to look at in tournaments, but I think anytime you're going up against that Miami defense, he's definitely viable. I think the problem we run into this week at quarterback is just, as you move down the pricing, I would love to say, like Detroit comes to Washington, that's like been such a smash spot for most teams. But, you can't trust Dwayne Haskins even at 4,900. That's just not a place you're probably going to go. Maybe if you're like mass entering tournaments, you go with like a Dwayne Haskins, Terry McLaurin stack and try to get some cheap money there so you can pay up for some other guys. I just don't think the upside's there necessarily for Dwayne Haskins to have enough of a ceiling game to help you take down a tournament. Personally, the place that I would probably look at is maybe Nick Foles going into Tennessee. Foles last week, coming off of his first game since week 1. Respectable. 296, 2 touchdowns, 18.8 DraftKings points. His price this week somehow. He was 5,500 last week. Somehow he's actually went down to 54. I'm sorry, he's 5,600 last week. He went down to 5,400. Going up against the Tennessee defense is 28th against the pass. I think that $500 savings moved down to Nick Foles. Off of someone like Baker could potentially be a strong pivot there. I do not like, obviously, Mason Rudolph going against Cincinnati this week. I don't like that. Interesting scenario brewing kind of in Chicago. You've got Trubisky at 5,100. You've got Chase Daniel at 5,000. I don't know. I don't know if I would go there even against a bad Giants defense. I don't know that I would go there. Trubisky's hip is obviously an issue. Again, with Chase Daniel, I'm not sure there's enough of a ceiling there, even at 5,000. For him to be viable. We're hoping to get 15 points out of him in cash. I just don't know that we can get there. So probably staying away from the Chicago quarterbacks. And really the conundrum we kind of run into is that a lot of our quarterbacks we kind of like to look towards either have a bad matchup this week or they're priced up. And DraftKings has done a really nice job of kind of pricing these guys, where they should be based on matchup. So I think right now, it's going to be interesting to kind of see roster construction. The only other place that I would look to maybe go, and the only reason I would say this is because it kind of looks like a bounce back spot, is maybe look at Tom Brady at home against the Cowboys. Traditionally, when Brady has had, an off game like he had Sunday, he tends to bounce back well. I mean, you go back to week 4 against Buffalo, only completed 46% of his passes for 150 yards for an interception. Next week he comes out and torches Washington. Last weekend struggled badly in Philadelphia. 216 yards, no touchdowns, just 8.5 DraftKings points. The week maybe, for at $6,000, $6K, I think Tom Brady might be worth paying up for, and you could get, kind of maybe capture that 4 or 5 times value. I could easily see him maybe getting like a 24, 25, 30-point DraftKings day, just because that seems to be what Brady does. He just kind of seems to bounce back well. Moving to the running back spot, I mean, Christian McCaffrey again is at 10,500, which is just an obscene number. But as he's proven, I mean, he's kind of matchup proof. I think it's going to be interesting. That Carolina-New Orleans game is probably going to be super popular. I don't know that Carolina can keep up there, just because, the quarterback play out of Kyle Allen's just been so bad. I just, I kind of tend to shy away from them in this type of situation. And, I think if you're looking at, the Panthers going into New Orleans, obviously New Orleans is usually putting up a ton of points. It's really a bad matchup for the Carolina defense, but McCaffrey's just kind of been matchup proof. I mean, he's absolutely smashed pretty much every week. I mean, these are his last 4 games. DraftKings points 30.5, 40.6, 29.1, 33.1. Even at 10.5, you're still getting almost 3 times value every week out of this guy. And when you're paying 10.5 and you're getting 3 times value, that's a far cry, even from paying like 8,000 and getting 3 times value out of someone like Saquon or James Conner. And again, I think we've got to look, and this is gonna be one of those weird running back weeks where people are gonna want to play like Bo Scarborough, or people are going to still want to play Kalen Ballage, which I just don't understand. And like Brian Hill, he's got probably the worst matchup on the board. I think at the running back spot, we're going to have some decisions to make. DraftKings did a nice job of Jalen Samuels this week, pricing him up in light of the James Conner injury going up against Cincinnati. You would think Jalen Samuels would probably be very popular, very highly owned. Going against a bad Cincinnati defense. They're coming back from a West Coast trip last week. With Connor out, looks like Connor's going to be out. Jalen Samuels at 7,200. I don't know that I play Jalen Samuels at 7,200. I mean, especially when I can drop down and get to like Derrick Henry against a run funnel Jacksonville defense. I can look at even like Kareem Hunt. Is it a James White game this week for New England? Darius Geis, I think, is interesting at 4.7K, going up against Detroit, who's last in the league against the run. And I mean, Geis showed a little bit of juice last week. So looking at the running back position, I don't think that someone like Samuels is necessary. Again, in tournaments, he might be a good play, just given the fact that 7,200 seems like a steep price for him. He's largely dependent on catching the ball in the backfield. It's hard to say how they're going to attack the Cincinnati defense this week, so I don't know that Jalen Samuels will be probably in one of my main builds. I think McCaffrey's always viable, but again, I think it's a matter of can we get up to him in terms of price. You got Kamara at 8,200. You got Nick Chubb at 8,100. Chubb will probably be the chalk this week, just because at 8,100 going against a bad Miami team, I think people probably think that he'll get a lot of carries, maybe in the second half. I just think 8,100 is a lot for a guy who's right now, he's sharing that backfield with Kareem Hunt, and he just has no pass game involvement. And on a PPR site, that just makes him so touchdown dependent. I mean, and if he can get a couple touchdowns, he's definitely viable at 8,100. But I think you're asking for too much touchdown upside on a PPR site. Moving down the list, I think Leonard Fournette at 7,300 is interesting. Kind of thought that he would have a bigger game last week, and he disappointed. Leonard Fournette could be another option. The guy I think I probably want to talk about more than any, though, and I mean even more than like Bo Scarborough. At 4,200 is probably viable if you think he's going to get most of the snaps, but it's just a matter of kind of how the coaching staff's going to use him. But the guy that I kind of want to talk about is, well, we already talked about Darius Geis, is Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders comes in priced at $5,000. He's at $5K, which is price jumped up $900 from last week. Did not get the work in the passing game that he normally does. Only 2 catches on 4 targets. In a backfield that he's largely now owning right now, assuming Jordan Howard's still out. I think Miles Sanders could actually be a nice pivot this week. In a good tournament play going up against the Seattle defense is just kind of mediocre against the run. If Seattle's game plan is to try to keep, Philadelphia's game plan is to try to keep Seattle off the field, Miles Sanders will have a big day here, and I don't think that there's too many people that are a threat to him for carries and touches. When I was watching the game on Sunday, I actually thought to myself, man, Miles Sanders is getting a lot of work here. Maybe this is one of those situations where they continue to give him extra work and start to give him the ball more, trust him a little bit more. And in a week where maybe we're trying to find some value at the running back position, I think a guy like Sanders, a guy like Geis, maybe Kareem Hunt, David Montgomery, if you really want to make a dart throw. Again, I just have a hard time on DraftKings rostering guys that don't catch passes. So, I think it's going to be interesting. Roster construction is going to be very interesting this week. And there will be plays that open up. And, again, it's early in the week to kind of talk about some of this stuff because we got to figure out, injuries and things like that. So, monitor some of these things as we're moving forward to the week. Wide receiver, Michael Thomas, he was priced at $9,000 last week, I believe, $9,900. His price is down to $9,300 going against Carolina. Not worried about James Bradbury against him. Thomas operates in a different way than Julio Jones did. I don't think Bradbury can handle him. Julio priced all the way up to $800. That's up from $7,500 last week. Still think he's a strong stacking target with Matt Ryan. Odell Beckham, though, priced up to $7,000. Both Tampa Bay wideouts are at $7,200 and $7,300. And there's guys that I wouldn't touch this week, like John Brown at $6,700 against Denver. No, thank you. I don't obviously think I want Amari Cooper going up against New England at $66K. Again, both are probably viable in tournaments because the ownership's going to be low, and maybe you get a ceiling game type situation. But I think in your range of outcomes, that would be probably towards the range where it's less likely. I do think Jarvis Landry could be a nice pivot off of Odell at $6,300. I think any wide receiver, and I think, Landry's running more routes down the field this year, but I think any wide receiver can eat against them. And wide receivers normally where we kind of find some value, but DraftKings done a nice job of kind of working through their algorithm to make sure that it accounts for, teams that just aren't very good. And continuing to move down through, some of these wide receivers just to see if there's anybody kind of in the value range that maybe we would want to bring up. I mean, one name that I've always liked is Nelson Aguilar, especially if Alshon Jeffrey's out again. I think it'd be a potentially a nice day for him on the cheap. And then, Tyler Boyd with a squeaky wheel narrative, came out today saying that he wasn't getting the ball enough. So, maybe they'll try to throw him the ball more. Some of these guys, though, I mean, DraftKings is just, I think they're screwing up. I mean, like Tyrell Williams for 5,900. I mean, I think he would almost be lock button for me at 5,900. Maybe the same thing with Curtis Samuel at 5,400. Just because I always have to run up, and just figure out what we want to do with him. Looking at some of the higher price guys, I mean, I just think it comes down to roster construction. Do you trust Julian Edelman? I don't think I do, even in a PPR format. Like I said, I've already said already, I didn't want any part of John Brown. Kenny Golladay might be a play this week against Washington. He'll probably get the best of Josh Norman. I can't imagine that Josh Norman will put up much of a fight for him. Calvin Ridley had the big day last week. Coming back this week, priced up to 6,500, but again gets another great matchup with Tampa Bay. And one guy that they probably didn't price up enough, honestly, is Cameron Sutton or Cortland Sutton. I know he's going against a pretty tough Buffalo defense, but I mean, Cortland Sutton just absolutely ate last week. Actually, he's eaten the last 2 weeks. It looks like getting Emmanuel Sanders out of the way might have paved the way for Cortland Sutton to start getting all these touches, which is really good because he's a really talented guy. But I don't know that 6,200 is nearly enough of a discount for a guy like that, especially when you drop down and get Tyrell Williams at 5,900, get Curtis Samuel at 5,400. I mean, I just think there's a lot of other ways that maybe you can go. As far as tight end goes, moving there. News and notes on Austin Hooper is that he hasn't been ruled out from practicing Thursday or Friday. They're going to keep monitoring and kind of see how he does. My guess is he doesn't play. I think Zach Ertz is a strong play against Seattle this week. Unfortunately, our flow chart that suggests tight ends against Arizona is not going to be needed because, Arizona's on a bye this week. But tight end, it's always a wasteland. I mean, I think you've got kind of some decisions to make there. Do you go cheap, which has been my preferential thing? I mean, it's just hitting on the right cheap tight end. Who's going to produce this week? I mean, maybe you get like a TJ Hawkinson week, or maybe you get a Vance McDonald week, or, maybe you get a Darren Waller week. A lot of it just is going to depend. I don't think, even though Waller's price is way down to, actually it's up a little bit from where it was last week, but it's down from where it was a couple of weeks ago at 6,300. I mean, I think even a Waller at 5,700 is maybe worth a play. Some of this we're going to have to monitor some injury situations with Ingram and Delaney and just kind of see where they're at. So, but yeah, I mean, when we're looking at some of these positions, I usually prefer to punt the tight end to try to fit in more guys that maybe I like. And it's just tight end's a crapshoot. So we got to try to do the best we can there. Greg Olsen, he's only 4,100, but again, his price is about $1,000 more than it was last week. So that's just kind of a brief overview of DraftKings for this week and the pricing, and maybe you can compare those notes with your own. But that just gives you a pre-look at what we did there. And let's just have some fun here. Let's just go and make a lineup. So let's see. And just looking right now, I've got Tom Brady, Kamara, and we're going to throw Edelman in with Tom Brady. So we got those three. Defense, I'm always fascinated to see what they do. No defense is under $2,000 this week. That's wild. So, I guess for some of this stuff, you got some decisions to make. But I'm going to go with Seahawks D. Probably have to come down off of Julio to get to where I want to get, which isn't really optimal. That's not really what I want, because I want Julio this week, but so maybe get off of Edelman, drop down to Sanu, see where that puts us. Sanu 5,500. Okay, now we're cooking. That puts us 4,700. Which is perfect because we can put Darius Geis. So what I got is Tom Brady, Alvin Kamara, Chris Carson, Mohamed Sanu, Julio Jones, Robbie Anderson, Vance McDonald, Darius Geis, and the Seahawks D. That is for a GPP. And again, I mean, it's early. It's Tuesday in the week. A little bit early to try to come up with some of this stuff. But just thought I'd give you guys a little different perspective this week. I'll be out of town next week, so I don't know if the Fantasy Football Files will happen. If you don't hear from me, guys, have a happy Thanksgiving. As always, I appreciate you listening. You can find me on Twitter at Jason Kamlowski. I hope you guys win some money this weekend. Hope you have some good lineups. And hope in your season-long leagues you guys will get a win. We will see you hopefully next week at this same spot, same time. Have a great week, guys.
The Josh Kirby on Sports podcast, part of the Mayo Please podcast network, is sponsored by Route 11 Chips. Make sure you grab a bag today inside your local Martin's, Food Lion, and Giant stores. And our new sponsor and fellow sports fans at PM Plus Reserves, providing reserve studies for homeowner and condominium associations in the Washington metropolitan area for the past 30 years. Make sure you check us out on all streaming platforms via the Mayo Please and the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. You can also find the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, along with the Mayo Please on Twitter. Have any questions for the show? Feel free to shoot us an email at kirbyonsports@gmail.com.
All right, we are back. Thanks once again to Jason Kamlowski, as always, for Fantasy Football Files. A different take this week on fantasy sports, so make sure you take a listen to that segment, because it was very interesting to listen to what he had to say about DraftKings and other fantasy sites like that. So back here with Dan Dembski, taking a look at a Week 12 preview, starting off Thursday night with the Indianapolis Colts and Houston Texans. The Sunday slate of games, 1 o'clock, Detroit at Washington. If you want to go, Dan, just let me know. Tampa Bay playing Atlanta, Denver playing Buffalo, the New York Giants against the Chicago Bears, the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Cincinnati Bengals, the Miami Dolphins and the Cleveland Browns, the Carolina Panthers and the New Orleans Saints, the Oakland Raiders and the New York Jets, the Seattle Seahawks and the Philadelphia Eagles, the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tennessee Titans. And that starts your 4:05 slate. 4:25, another big matchup, the Dallas Cowboys and the New England Patriots. NBC Sunday Night Football, Green Bay against San Francisco, and Monday Night Football, Baltimore and Los Angeles Rams. Cardinals, Chargers, Chiefs, and Vikings all get the bye week. So, Dan, starting with you, any notable games you're looking out for in Week 12?
I think in the early slate of games, I'm looking at probably the Panthers and Saints. That's a good divisional matchup. We'll see if the Panthers can rebound. Obviously, they're not the favorite in that game. They're 9.5-point underdogs, but interesting to see how Kyle Allen, if he can bounce back against a much better team. Away from Carolina in New Orleans, that's going to be a tough matchup for them, but that seems to be an exciting game. Let me see. I kind of like the 1 o'clock matchup, Seahawks and Eagles. We'll see if the Eagles can. The Eagles are actually favorited right now in that game. Wow, that's an interesting line. It's only a 1.5-point line, so I'm sure it'll shift between now and Sunday when the line closes. But that's interesting right now. But that's a game I think that could be. I think the Eagles could actually upset the Seahawks in that game, and I'll be watching out for that one. Also, I think that's really it. As far as the not primetime games, I think the Cowboys-Pats game is obviously going to be a great matchup. We'll see if the Cowboys can win, because it seems like all their wins recently have come against bad football teams and teams who are struggling with injuries. And we'll see if the Cowboys can put my theory to rest. But every time the Cowboys wins, Skip Bayless is so obnoxious on Twitter.
Oh, yeah, I hate him. I'm sorry, but I hate him.
He acts like they won the freaking Super Bowl every time they win. It's like, dude, they just beat the Lions. Calm down. So we'll see if he runs his mouth if they end up winning that game. But I don't think they will. But we shall see. I think the two primetime games on Sunday and Monday are very intriguing. Packers 49ers, couldn't ask for a better matchup between two of the hottest teams in the NFC right now. I think I give the Niners a slight advantage in that game just because they're at home. It's tough to go out in the West Coast and play. So we'll see if I think that's going to be a high-scoring game, unlike a lot of the previous primetime games. So that's a very exciting game. And then, of course, I got to pick my Ravens, traveling to Los Angeles to take on the Rams on Monday Night Football. That might be one of the best matchups of Monday Night Football this season. There's been some really good ones, but I think that one might take the cake. So that one's obviously going to have my full attention, and we'll see if the Ravens can keep their winning ways up. Very tough to go out there and win, so we'll see if they can do it. But there's some really interesting games this weekend, and there's a couple that are dubs. So hopefully we can see some good football this weekend, and it continues.
Yeah, for me, I'm looking at Green Bay, San Francisco as a very close game, as you said earlier. Two hot teams in the NFC right now. Dallas and New England, obviously. Two good quarterbacks in Seattle and Philly, Carson Wentz and Russell Wilson. I expect them to be battling it out throughout the game. Divisional matchup, Carolina and New Orleans. I'm interested to see about that. Not really Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. That's usually a rivalry, but Cincinnati is 0-10, so I'm not sure how much you can count on that being a close game. Detroit and Washington, I'm expecting Washington to just blow Detroit out of the water. Sarcasm right there. Sarcasm. Yeah,
that was good, man. Very fun.
Yep, but yeah, that's about it for close games for Week 12. But we will see what happens, and when it does, we'll be right back with you next week. So I hope everybody enjoys their Week 12, and hopefully your fantasy teams do well and everything.
Yeah.
My fantasy team will be struggling because Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook are on a bye. So I am picking up people on the waivers like crazy while keeping Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook. So interesting to see. But Dan, any last words for the show?
Just listen to Jason Kamlowski. He's got all the right picks for you for your fantasy football files. I know I need to, because my fantasy football teams, I got 3 of them, and 2 of them are just struggling right now. So I need all the help I can get. I think Jason's the guy to turn to at this point.
And as always, Jason, you can find him on Twitter at Jason Kamlowski, writer for Dynasty Football Digest. So, Dan, as always, great pleasure to have you on the show. Next week, we are hoping to get you right back on in studio. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can make that work out. So that about does it for this episode of the Josh Kirby on Sports podcast. As always, want to thank Dave Johnson, JR Beats Official, and MPT Now Productions. We are part of the Mayo Please Podcast Network. You can check them out on Instagram and Twitter, along with all streaming platforms. And make sure you check out us on all social media platforms and all streaming platforms. We're sponsored by Route 11 Chips and PM Plus Reserves. As always, want to thank them for everything they do for the podcast as well. Until next time, Dan and Josh saying so long, and we'll catch you next week. Peace out.